you're in a much better position as a government to negotiate contracts with private vendors in a more efficient way, you know? So having expertise, I can't stress it enough, needs to be the primary aim for any government. To either make sure that the ministers are competent enough to do so, or if they're not competent enough to do so, at least they have a team that is able to do that, which can inform the government to do so. You see what I mean?
I see what you mean.
So in this day and age also, you have the ability to find expertise globally. You don't only need to rely on the domestic population of Iraq to find these expertise. So with access to experts, you will be able to build a much better comprehension of your duties as a minister. With this increase of comprehension, you then can think, what can we do better? What is available to us, right? Who should we partner with? How much money should we invest? And then with this thinking promoted to your external stakeholders, international business becomes much more confident in your abilities. When they become much more confident, they have a bigger offering that they can provide to you. And also domestically, smaller businesses can thrive to make sure that it takes advantage of this new way of thinking of the government. But there's no point talking about it unless you actually have this incentive from the government to make these decisions. And the decision is, we need competence, we need experts, and also, apart from that, we need a political structure which doesn't reward corruption. We need a political structure which is more transparent, because at the end of the day, it benefits not only you, but it will benefit your children and your grandchildren, right? Which is very important, because you may have a system in place, as we've seen in the history of Iraq, where we have had dictators in the past. And no matter if you feel you're benefiting, your kids and grandkids, at the very least, will not live in the same society as you do, because government done badly will always end up a mess. 100%, it's a law of nature. If you do governance badly, then it will never yield good fruits. So it's an incentive for everyone involved to do things better, because it helps everyone in the long term if you do things in a much more correct way.
So from your index, what differentiates a country that protects itself from one that becomes exposed to external corporates?
Yeah. So what we must also keep in mind is that the corporates aren't the enemies in this case, because a corporation has a very simple incentive structure. No matter what corporation you are, right? You're thinking of, how can I maximize, business for myself? That's what you're thinking about. You wake up every morning and you think to yourself, how can I make more money for my business? Who should we partner with to make sure that our products and services are sold more across the world, right? That's your main aim as a corporation. So everyone knows what the incentives are of a corporation. What's harder to gauge is, what are the incentives and what are the pressures internally in a government? Because externally, you will have things like regional divide, you may have ethnic and religious fragmentation in a country, you may have histories of an inconsistent political identity, which Iraq has, again, as I mentioned, from the time of the Ottomans to the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where it was a British mandate, to then King Faisal, and then Saddam Hussein, and then the chaos after Saddam Hussein, and then into what we have today as a democracy. We need to understand, what are the political pressures that a country faces, and businesses need to understand this, and other countries need to understand this, so that you can know as a business, what do I need to do to engage with this government in a better way, right? But when you get to the higher levels of business and politics, naturally, when the stakes are higher, right, the pressures are higher, and you don't have the time that you need to make these decisions. So when you're looking at the world through the Global Power Index, what you're noticing is that the countries which are higher in the index have historically performed higher, because they have had the ability to maximize their potential in 6 different areas, right? When I mean maximize, they've done their best to make sure that they reach the best levels. So these 6 different areas include their consumer markets, their military balance, their technological leadership, their systemically important commodities, their geo-strategic positioning, and their financial strength. So the countries which are towards the top of the index have made sure that in all of these 6 different areas, they've progressed faster than anyone else. Countries which are lower in the index haven't progressed as fast than the ones which are closer to the top.
Clearly.
Which doesn't mean they're bad, which essentially means you as a country have a bigger potential to do better if your public institutions are in order. The countries which are towards the lower end have dysfunctional, public services and corporate governance and political governance, which lead them to where they are. But if they were to fix these issues, at least marginally, I think what you'll see is bigger and better results from those countries. And these are the countries which grow at 5, 6, 7% a year, right? Because the
Right.
US, China, and these countries, although China's numbers are a bit different, but the US and Europe aren't growing at 5 and 10% a year. But the countries which are getting into a position where they're fixing their global governance, or they're fixing their political governance and their business governance, their GDP is increasing exponentially faster than the more developed countries are. Which means if you are a corporation inside the country, or if you're a startup inside the country that wants to do better, if you can see that your country is improving their transparency and their rules of engagement in business, right, and you're let free to do business properly, then these are the countries which succeed, overwhelmingly more so than the more developed countries, which are there and they're fighting on the peripheries. Which means the United States and China are fighting on the peripheries, meaning they're fighting on advanced technology, which Iraq is not in a position to focus on because they have more immediate challenges to focus on. See? So you must see your development through the arc of your own history, and you must make sure that for you to do a better job, it's like a car. If you don't maintain the vehicle, if you give it the wrong kind of petrol, if you give it diesel instead of petrol, right? If you use the clutch and the handbrake rough and don't do it properly, the car is not going to perform well over time. But if you take care of the car in different ways, it's going to last longer for you. So just like a government is like the driver of the car, it needs to make sure it uses its public institutions, and it uses the 6 different areas I mentioned, right? The 6 different, consumer markets, military balance, etc., and maximizes themselves in a way which is productive for the country. If you do that consistently over time, you're in a much better position to succeed.
So, Professor, like 5G is often described as a form of national power, as you know. So how do you see 5G affecting geopolitically, competition globally?
Well, the only reason why 5G is important geopolitically is because the production or the service provisions of 5G only come from a handful of countries, and those countries are the most advanced, as I said, regions. Right? We have China with Huawei and ZTE, right? And we have Ericsson and Nokia, which in an industry like telecommunications, you don't get much variety in terms of who you work with, because that Pareto effect and that compounding effect mean there's only a few players at the top which can provide the advanced infrastructure for your needs. So that being the case, if the technology was much more equal, it would almost be like air that you breathe. The air that you breathe is universal and it's available to anyone, which means it's not a strategic asset. You see what I mean? Because everyone has it, so you don't need to think about it, right? But if air was controlled by a few countries, it becomes a strategic asset and it becomes a tool for political gain. So that's why 5G is seen in this light. It's because it's not produced by every country equally, right?
Of course.
And with that being the case, if only a few countries and regions control it, and if it becomes as important as it's becoming, then what you can do with the technology and who you partner with really determines the future of your country. So what does China do? China says to Iraq, we will buy more of your oil. China currently is the biggest buyer of Iraqi oil. If you want us to continue to buy your oil, China would say, then maybe you look at using Huawei and our other providers for your tech infrastructure rollout, right? Because for the countries which are at the top of the index, as I mentioned, they are in a power competition which is beyond their borders, right? They're using things which go beyond borders like technology to secure their interests over the long run. And the power that technology gives you for data access, right? And for the ability to control and to manipulate and to pressure countries to do what they want them to do, using this technology becomes even greater as time passes.
So, Professor,
right? So if Iraq can't produce the technology themselves, they must rely on external players. If the external players are the 2 biggest and most powerful countries in the world, according to our index, US being number 1 and China being number 2, and India, in fact, being number 3, although India isn't as involved in this tech race at this level. This is why it becomes a geopolitical focus point, you see?
Yeah, I see. But when a foreign company controls 5G, does it gain leverage over the host nation? That's what I hear from your question,
Yeah, it has the potential to, of course, because again, with 5G, again, it's not just having fast internet speeds, it gives you access to metadata, right? It also allows you to control the quality of the technology over time. You see what I mean? So if you buy into a technology package from a specific vendor, especially core components, then you're at risk. Which is why, especially in the telecommunication space, countries want a diverse, vendor offering for the different levels of the tech stack for the telecommunication sector. So the RAN components and the core components may come from a specific provider, right? But other components across the tech stack will come from a diversified range, right? So which is why you have Vodafone in the mix, which is why you have domestic providers in the mix now in Iraq, because you must have a diversified offering just so that one country doesn't have a monopoly on this very important, strategically important technology. You mustn't have that. And the smaller countries have made sure that it's much more diversified, measuring strategic importance with cost, right? With the ease of use, with all of these different considerations to make sure that you are not vulnerable, to these potential manipulations and pressures from these countries, you see? So that's what a smart country does.
So what strategic risks should countries like Iraq consider before adopting, 5G foreign actors, like foreign companies?
Yeah, well, that conversation has happened already. If you were to ask me that question before, technology was developed at that stage, my answer would be the same as it is now. But that conversation, I think it's too late to have, because they've already, for their core components, have gone with Huawei, you see? So that's why, it becomes interesting for these countries, because as you develop as a country, if you do a good job in developing your country, then the data that's produced and the potential that's produced from your country only increases, and if it increases, other countries and other service providers want access to that productivity, and when you have these happening together is when a country becomes very valuable, and that's when you see the talk of geopolitics becoming even more heated or important in different parts of the world. So Iraq has already chosen, right, for many different reasons, Huawei as their core RAN and their core service providers for their technology stack. And that conversation is dead and buried, because for them now to change and go for Nokia or Ericsson, it's not going to be possible, right? And do they have the incentive to do that? No, because again, China is buying the majority of their oil. Why would they want to change providers and risk, lower oil prices or lower oil demand from their biggest buyer? It makes no sense, So what Iraq is doing now is that 5G isn't a core priority for the country either. You have to realize they have other priorities when it comes to diversifying their economy, building infrastructure, hopefully fixing the domestic political governance of the country. And 5G becomes an important aspect, but it's nowhere near the top of the list. You see what I mean? What's more important are the immediate needs of the country that need to be catered to. And 5G plays a part in that, but currently it's not a big conversation in the country at all.
Yeah, but to fix what we have here in Iraq, we have to dive into these aspects of the 5G, the 5G case and the other cases. Just not one case, it's all cases that's made us at the number 80 in your list, you know that?
That's true. You must have a focus, but the focus is going to be with different levels of intensity for different times. You see what I mean? So if, again, the government should have their finger on the pulse for different things, of course. They need to make sure they understand what's happening here, and here, right? But in terms of their priorities as the government, what do they need to achieve in the next 5 years for them to say this has been a successful, bout of leadership? What do we need to do? Well, the first thing that we need to do is to make sure that the primary thing, no matter who you are as a government, is to make sure that the needs of the people are catered for. Education, healthcare, infrastructure, social services, rule of law, justice. These basic things need to be catered for, so that the basics are taken care of. Then you need to focus on employment. You need to focus on infrastructure building. You need to focus on innovation. You need to focus on making sure that your national companies and your startups companies become successful. For that to happen, you need to root out corruption. You need to make sure that that your public procurement services are done properly. You need to make sure that the rule of law functions in a way which gives confidence to internal investors and companies, and also external investors and companies. And then when you reach a stage like this, you have the capacity for 5G to become important, because now companies need 5G to improve their business, right? But if business isn't at the level, where 5G is necessary as much, then 5G just becomes something that you do because it's part of the conversation and you put money towards it. But if it's not used by those companies that need it because industry isn't there yet, then you're wasting your time and money and effort focusing on it to the level that you probably are, because you need to have the demand for this technology to be able to provide this technology. Because without the demand, supplying it becomes unnecessary to that level of supply that you have, you know?
I know.
That's why I'm saying you need to have a hierarchy of things which are of importance to you, and then, you know, tackle them.
Yeah, to see the larger
you know,
picture for
slowly
sure.
but surely, one by one.
So why do international telecom companies focus so heavily on entering emerging markets or developing states?
Well, the main reason for that is because for developing markets, and especially markets which have a big population, right, which have a more secure revenue source, which then can be used to develop industry, telecommunications companies focus on them because there's a stickiness to them, which means, again, when it comes time to the infrastructure, when it comes time to the actual offering, if you get in there early enough, then you develop with the country, right? So your offering becomes the most primary, you sell more of your services and products, and you develop with that country over time because you are there from the beginning of its development. What hinders that, as I mentioned before, is the ability to compete on an even playing field with the domestic providers, right? And especially if the domestic providers may not have some of the expertise and some of the offerings which the external provider can provide, there becomes a tension, because the business people will speak to the politicians, which will say, listen, why are you inviting these external companies to come? We have enough at our doorstep with the offerings we have. You're going to ruin it, you know, you're going to cause issues. And these are the conversations, these are the issues that you face behind closed doors, you see? But any company, whether you're domestic or whether you're external, wants to develop at the same pace or even faster than the country itself. So you must reach a country which does not have a saturation of that product or service, which has the ability to grow and develop, you know, so that you can make the best investment choices for yourself. Just like if you're in real estate, you wouldn't buy a house to develop if it's already perfectly created, because there's no value add you can add to increase the price of it, right? You want to find a house in an area which is good, but is developing, so you can put some money towards, you can fix up the house so that you can sell it in the future for more, right? And then maybe buy some more houses in the neighborhood, work together with the local authorities so they can give you tax breaks, whatever it is, to incentivize you to do better. And that's what makes, you know, production, that's what makes neighborhoods grow, and that's what makes countries grow. So the investor or the corporation needs to see room for development in that country, to put effort behind its sales and its procurement to do that properly. If there's no way in which you can succeed, or if the rules are not done set properly, then you get into trouble if you do things in not a proper way. You see? So that's the dynamics that happen, not only in Iraq, as I said, but many different emerging market governments, where there's potential, but there's inconsistencies in the rules. But companies still want to do it because it's such a good long-term business bet that they continue if they think it's worthwhile.
So, Professor, can you say, like, is it because these markets have like weaker oversight, making it easier to push deals that wouldn't pass in Europe?
Well, look, that is certainly an aspect of it, I think, but that's not a driver for international business to do so. Because again, with these rules, which aren't secure, there's no guarantee for you as a business that you'll succeed. Because let's say hypothetically, yeah, a company, whether domestic or international, takes advantage of the fact that the rules aren't as secure. Okay, so they're working with one key person at the government, okay, who has centralized power, or what we call in business key man risk. Okay, so you work together with that person. All of a sudden, the next day, he gets fired or something happens and he's no longer in that position, right? What happens to you? No one knows who you are. The people who are now put into place aren't incentivized to work with you because they're not getting the payoffs, right? That deal falls flat and you have to start from scratch again, you see? Which again, isn't good for the people who live in these situations, because the products you're providing aren't going to be rolled out as fast to the people. But if you have a system where the rules are in place, no matter who comes in and out of office, you see the procurement process, you see at what stage they're at, you see what the benefits are, you see how much money you have to spend, right? For the main benefit of the people, this is why it should be done, right? So corruption benefits those involved and not the people, but clear rules of transparency benefit the people. So you need to decide as a leader, who do you want to serve?
Okay.
You know, if you want to serve the people for the long term, which is your mandate, which is your duty, especially if you've been voted in there, then you must do so. And it may be hard, but you must do so, because if you don't, things get messy and your reputation as a person goes down the toilet. And would you want that for yourself? Would you want that
Of
for
course
people
not.
who come off? Would you want that for your family? It becomes personal at a certain stage, you know?
Yeah, I
So
know.
these are the considerations that everyone needs to think about. Even big corporations, you know, you may get involved in the country through non-regulated ways, but if it comes out that you do a bad thing, you know, you lose your job, you lose your reputation, you can go to jail, you can get fined. So it's not a good thing to do.
To what extent can weak institutional understanding lead to a loss of digital sovereignty?
Again, the sound is so bad. I'm so sorry. The sound at the beginning is bad, and then it comes in.
I'll try to repeat it again. To what extent can weak institutional understanding lead to a loss of digital sovereignty?
Okay, so digital sovereignty has become a very hot topic in the last couple of years because of its importance to the stability of the state and its security and its ability to be compromised by external powers. Again, as we mentioned, the reason why this is the case is because there are only very few providers which can actually provide these services and products essentially to these governments, you know, and especially if they're at very different ends of the ideological scale or what they want to achieve, or the perception of them being very different, then it becomes a very polarizing choice for governments. If you go for, you know, the East, to China, or you go for the West, it becomes really that polarizing. So each government now is realizing the importance of their digital footprint and of the metadata which is produced by the people in their country. This becomes valuable for many different reasons for a government, and different governments have different approaches to this, right?
Yes.
If you are in a position where the service providers come from your country, then you are in a better position to protect and to shape the offerings of these companies, right? Because you can, first of all, protect yourself from it, you know, and you can use these companies in certain ways to meet your own ends, you know? And for governments that don't have the ability to export or to produce their own information infrastructure, which they can protect themselves, they must find ways to do that using these external providers, which is always risky, because if you don't control it at source, you're always fighting a political battle, a strategic battle, a business battle behind the scenes, and sometimes in front of the scenes, that you must maintain. So when it comes time to countries like Iraq, which do this, which have, again, a growing digital footprint, and which has data now which could become valuable to different players, who you decide to work with becomes important for these reasons. So it'll be interesting to see how Iraq deals with this in the first place, what value they place on their own digital footprint as a country, and how they maneuver this increasingly segmented, powerful landscape, you know?
So, yeah.
So we will see how they do this in the long term, you know? But for sure, there are international regulations which want to come into place. Global governance in this instance becomes even more important, because you need to set the rules, or at least the rules of the game in place, and there needs to be a common understanding throughout the different players in terms of how do we tackle this, how do we protect ourselves, what kind of data are these companies collecting, why is it useful to them, how can we have access to it, you know? Because there's not only risk for the let me add another layer. It's not only a risk that the government loses its ability to control its data, but the people themselves in the country may find themselves at risk if the government uses this data for reasons which are not constitutional or which are not within the law. You see? So you have different levels of risk for different players. So if you are a civil society, you know, if you're a human rights activist, you could be worried that your government is using this data for reasons which can get you into trouble. If you're a government and you're at risk, you may think this big company is using this data for the use of a different government. You see, so different pressures at different levels of this stack, This is why it becomes important, because it goes to every single layer of society, across business and across time and across the world. We are becoming even more integrated, even more connected through technology, especially through different applications. If you remember, the Internet of Things became a big concept, which means technology will be pervasive throughout everyday, uses
It's thriving, yeah, for sure.
of products and services. And if you use technology to gain data on these things, then it can be used as harmless as a company wanting to advertise to you, or it could be used for more nefarious means by companies and governments and even bigger structures.
So, Professor, like, how should a country properly evaluate the background and history of a foreign company before allowing it into, critical sector like 5G and the telecommunication?
Look, what you do is actually, it's not that hard, The reason why it's not that hard is because, as I mentioned, there's only very few providers, And the providers typically are eager to work with you. So they will give you the ability to talk to them, to find out what it is they can do for you, et cetera, et cetera. Where the strings come into place is, what do you need to do to gain that technology, right? So for the West, for example, for a company to come in from the West, maybe there are some rules and regulations that need to be in place for them to be able to do business, which is fair enough, right? Maybe there's some things that the company says, listen, for us to do this, we need to know that this is in place, this governance principle is in place, because our government is asking this from us. You see what I mean?
I see what you mean.
And if you can provide this as a government, then you're less likely to work with that service provider, So that's not unfair. That's just the rules of the game, which are placed by the government of the company, that the government is overseeing, And then you have other strategies where government may say, like China say, listen, we can buy more of your oil, as I mentioned, if you then use guys. I'm not saying this is what happens, but this could be a technique that could happen, Or if you do this for us, if you buy more, if we do this, then you are more likely to use these guys for your operations.
So
when
your
you're
advice, your advice, if a company has faced, a serious legal disputes in Europe, should that automatically raise caution flags for a country or like Iraq or for our government?
But to be honest, listen, litigation across the world is prevalent, and it's not a new thing in business, And when you're looking at these things, these could be used as part of your decision-making processes, for sure, it can. But at the end of the day, you have to think, what does this mean to me as a government, right? Yes. What does this mean to me and my global development, my internal development, my regional development, right? Do I really care that this company or that company has a litigation battle against this person?
Yeah, and open cases already.
Maybe not,
Yeah.
It really depends. It depends on what your priorities are. It depends on what your governance standards say. It depends on what rules and regulations you've placed as important in your country, and you follow what's there. That's what you must do. And if you don't do that, and if you think, well, it's much more basic than that, it's one person or two people making a decision which doesn't have the oversight, that's when the rules of the game aren't as clear, and that's when you find a lot of fog in business, which can't be understood as easy.
So what safeguards, should states adopt to protect their interests when partnering with a foreign, telecom company or tech companies?
Well, that's a good question. That's a very good question. And it depends, again, what the service offering is. But again, you need to have a risk-based model, right, which goes through what exactly it is you want to protect, what you want to have assurances for, right, where you have the right to claim, where you have the right to litigation, right? What responsibilities does the vendor have? What responsibilities do you have? What insurance policies are in place if things go wrong? All of these different things need to be understood and agreed for each player to understand what its responsibilities are in any kind of contract, right? Just like you working for the channel you work with, you have a contract in place that says these are your rights and your responsibilities. These are the rights and the responsibilities of your channel, right? But when it comes down to a bigger project, these same dynamics are still in play. So what matters is that, do you have the right approach? Do you know what to ask for? Do you know what to look for, right? When it comes time to do these things at the level which will protect you as a government. If you do, that's great. If you think you have more to learn, you must get these outside expertise to help inform your decision-making process so that you make the best decision, again, for the people of your country. That's the main aim of a government. It's not to enrich itself.
But Professor,
make sure that
Professor, like, do fragile states need an entirely different level of protection compared to strong states? I mean, that's what I'm hearing from you.
Do they need a different level of protection?
Exactly.
They need to understand, first of all, they must have responsibility over their own country. They must understand and have the expertise on their team to know what exactly it is we're doing and what are the rules, what's best practice in this, right? What are the global governance regimes that tell me what we must consider? You see? If you have this in place, then fragile states, no matter if the reason why the reason why countries are fragile are for very different reasons, right? The way you become unfragile or stronger, more resilient is by having the expertise on your team and the political will to make changes to make you less fragile as a country. Fragility isn't a set thing that you're fragile and you're not fragile. It's a continuum, right, of risks and a continuum of strengths that you have as a country, which again is measured by our index. So fragile states, right, in quotes, are countries which have faced things in the past, which have hit their public institutions, which means governance becomes weaker. So for you to have a governance which is stronger, you must have the appropriate rules in place and people to follow these rules for you to make the best decision possible for your people. You see, and if you don't do that properly, then that's when you have issues, that's when things don't get rolled out fast enough, that's when you have delays and stalls, and that's where public confidence and investor confidence becomes much, much lower in your ability to actually do what you say you're going to do.
So finally, Professor, like, what advice would you give to policymakers in countries, like ranked similar to Iraq, when approached with a major telecom or 5G offers from global companies?
Well, I would say, and we do this often with governments, we advise them on different aspects of their nation building, and we use the index to inform our decisions and our analysis on their development. Being where Iraq is at the moment, what they must consider is, do you have the appropriate expertise on your team to make the decisions possible? Do you have a vision for how these innovations are going to help domestic businesses succeed? Do you have a long-term plan of if things change or if risks are introduced in a specific way that are predictable and may not be predictable? What do you do as a result of that, right? What are your contingencies? What's your plan B, C, and D when these things happen, or if these things happen, right?
Right, yeah.
And if you are not asking these questions, you must start asking these questions, because you must make sure that your country does not face the same history that it's faced over the last 20, 30, 40 years. You must have a history which is hopefully going in a better direction. And for you to go into a better direction, you need to understand where you stand as a country. And our index does a fantastic job in doing that. It gives you, across these different fields, where you stand as a country, where you must develop into for you to be a more successful country. And then you must have the political will, and you must have the internal dynamics to see through your decisions so that it happens in the right way and with the procedures that are in place to serve the people. That's what I say to Iraq, and now Al-Sudani now has a new term as a prime minister. So he has the mandate to actually do this. And I'm sure him and his cabinet are hopefully working hard to make sure these things are going in the right direction. So I wish him the best of luck in the work that he does. And I hope that at least what we said today is reflected in the policy decisions of your country and of your politicians to make sure that Iraq goes into a better future than we saw in the past.
Thanks a lot for your time, Professor. It was really valuable for us to have you here with us tonight. So thanks a lot. Have a wonderful day, sir.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.